Known as the greatest champion in the history of team sports, Bill Russell passed away peacefully at the age of 88 over the weekend. Dan Shaughnessy, sports columnist for the Boston Globe, he joins us now on OutKick 360. Loved having him on to discuss his new book, I Wish It Lasted Forever, which is stories and tales of him covering the Boston Celtics in the Larry Bird era. And he's certainly the perfect guest to have on today to reminisce on the late Bill Russell. Dan, thank you so much for the time. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you today?
We're doing very well. What comes to mind first when you hear that Bill Russell has passed away? What memory, what thought, what story did you immediately think of?
Well, it's a lot. I mean, I grew up in New England, and when they had it going here. Celtics were champions every year of my youth. I was in high school before I realized they don't win the championship automatically in the spring. And, they won 8 in a row, obviously 11 out of 13. And Bill was the constant. He was the one constant through the whole thing. All 11 championships. Red Auerbach retired from the bench and made Bill the head coach. So we were lucky to grow up with this kind of a sports team, sports model, team above self, playing defense, sharing the ball, not worrying about who scored the most points. And, Russell would block shots and keep them in play, accelerate the fast break. They had the whole thing going. And I've never lived in a world that Bill Russell wasn't part of. So it was just a shocking thing to learn that, not really immortal. None of us are. So that was a shocker. And then I went into work mode and I tracked down 93-year-old Bob Cousy, one of the last remaining teammates who can talk about what it was like to play with him and to live with him as a teammate in those years. And able to do that. But we're running out of guys. There's been a lot of attrition from that team in the last few years because they're old men now. And, we lost Tommy Heinsohn, Sam Jones, Casey Jones, John Havlicek, Frank Ramsey, and now Russell, 6 of the teammates in the last 4 years.
How complicated was his relationship with the city of Boston? I know it was that way for years, but did that situation thaw at all, Dan, when he came back to be honored in 2013? How was that situation in relationship later in life?
I mean, it evolved over the decades. He came into Boston in the 1950s and 60s, and they weren't selling out games. Team wasn't that popular, and even with the winning, they still didn't get the attention that they deserved. And the sport wasn't as major league as it has become. So, there was a little bit of a curve there, and he certainly encountered, racism, bigotry, you name it. I mean, he was born in Louisiana and grew up in Oakland, and now here he is in Boston, and he was pretty upright about it. He read his books. He was a brilliant man. He wrote great books, and he said Boston is a flea bag of racism. And people breaking into his house and doing nasty things in his house and making him feel very unwelcome. And I think when he had his number raised to the rafters at the Garden after he finished playing, he insisted it be in an empty Garden, no fans, not a game day, just a ceremony. So those things were real. And Bill Russell was never one to play the fool for anybody. He gave no quarter, and he stood up for what he believed in. I think things got better through the decades. I think Boston got better through the decades. There's a statue of Bill downtown. He came back for that, and he was here on and off pretty much regular basis, either as coming in as a coach of the Kings or the Sonics executive, or in his capacity as a resident Hall of Famer and handing out the Finals MVP trophy, which is named after him. And, of course, he was very respectful and got along with Red Auerbach till Red's dying days. So that was our connection to him. As a media person, you didn't have a lot of warm, fuzzy moments. There was a couple times where I had good experiences with him telling stories and giving us his great laugh and apologizing for all the times he never got back to me when I was working on something, because that's just the way he was. And I understood that. He gave us his game. That was enough. And it's the greatest game anybody ever gave us, City.
Curious about his relationship with fans, too. He wasn't an autograph guy, maybe until later in life where there was some financial transaction to it, from what I understand. Yep. You mentioned his books, Second Wind, The Memoirs of an Opinionated Man from 1979. He wrote, "In each case, my intention was to separate myself from the stars' idea about fans and fans' ideas about stars. I have very, very little faith in cheers, what they mean and how long they will last." That sounds like a tough way to be a star in American sports, and a very different way.
That was him. That's the unvarnished truth. That's how he was. And he knew some of those things would not make him popular. But again, he came roaring into the 60s and 70s. And I mean, he marched with Dr. King, and he was a pallbearer at Jackie Robinson's funeral, and he went to the Cleveland Summit to support Muhammad Ali with Jim Brown and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I believe he was at King's funeral, and he just he was not going to worry about what people thought of him. He was going to stand up for himself as a man and basically stick his tongue out at anybody who didn't like it. So I respected that. He was a very smart man. He's very intellectual. And again, you couldn't dispute anything he did on the court. He did it just the right way. And as the years went by, everybody kind of got used to it, and we respected him, and hopefully he started to respect the New England region a little bit more.
Boston Globe columnist Dan Shaughnessy with us on OutKick 360. We're reminiscing on the life of Bill Russell. Dan, would we give the example of Bill letting a player intentionally score, knowing the player was going to score, and tell us how he used that as the example of how he would outthink his opponents?
Well, you're doing your homework there. That was one that Archie Clark was the scorer for the Lakers, and this was one time Bill came to the Globe, and he was telling stories, and he was in a very good mood, and he liked this one, and it said a lot about him. But they're playing the Lakers, a routine regular season game on the road, and the Lakers are up 2 with 10 seconds to go, something like that, and had the ball. So that game's pretty much over. You're going to have to foul on the inbound, maybe try to steal it, but or watch them dribble out the clock, and then you lose. And Bill decided the best path here was to create a path to the basket for Archie Clark, who was a renowned scorer and wanted the 2 points, and would seize this opportunity to pad his stats and get 2 more points with a clear path. So Russell created that on the inbounds, and Clark went to the basket to score 2, and Russell came up with a chase down block and got the ball back. They tied it and won it in overtime. So he loved that. It was a way to, know your opponents, exploit their weaknesses, take advantage of those things, and win the game in a cerebral fashion, in addition to the competitive athleticism.
And Bill Russell, I know, wrote that, and he said it a lot, that I didn't play for Boston. I played for the Celtics and for Red Auerbach, and he didn't play for the city. And Red Auerbach, I know, later in his career, got a little bit creative with his contract because he thought he was owed some more money from previous ownership, where they were claiming that they were in poverty apparently during that period and would not get paid. But even then, Bill Russell wouldn't accept money when he was not playing. What can you tell us about that story, Dan, and the relationship with those two?
Yeah. I mean, the lasting thing, the Celtics were pretty much dirt poor as a franchise, and the Bruins owned the building, and a lot of competition there. Celtics had the better product, better team, but Boston was a hockey town until Russell and Kuzi and Havlicek and those guys got it going. So that did take a while. But yeah, when Chamberlain came around, he was dominating the sport, averaging 50 points a game, but Russ was able to beat him and beat his team almost every time. So Red, understanding the intellect of the athlete and being respectful to his player, he paid him $1 more. When Chamberlain got up to 100,000, Red said, "All right, you're going to make $100,001," and that was his way of showing respect and demonstrating that we value more. You don't need to score 50 points a game. As long as you win the game, we love you.
Wondering if you ever talked to any of your predecessors when you were starting out, and if there's ever a conversation about how no one thought to count blocks at some point during his career.
No, that's a good point. And we had old timers on the staff when I was a young man, and Jack Barry was one. Jack Barry at Boston Globe invented the word turnover for, turning the ball over to the other team. Obviously, it was thought of as a dessert, a popover, whatever, and Jack coined the phrase turnover and became a statistic. But yeah, Harvey in Philadelphia started with the stats. He was the more of a stat keeper, and a lot of the stuff was lost to the vapors with Chamberlain and Russell and what they did. So we laugh now. Marcus Smart got Defensive Player of the Year this year for the Celtics, but they didn't have that award when Russell played. It should have been just the Bill Russell Award for that thing. And you're right, block shots not counted, and all that just went into the ether.
How good of a job do you think that with the current makeup of the Boston Celtics organization, how far are they going to go in honoring Bill Russell in this upcoming season? How good of a job do you think they're going to do in doing that?
They're generally pretty good. They have good ownership now, very respectful of the history. And again, as we said, there's been patches for a lot of guys: Tommy Heinsohn, Sam Jones, Casey Jones. So it's hard to honor everybody at once. But this is a special situation. I think the city maybe could step up a little bit. Russell has a statue. It went up in 2013, I think. But it's not in the most visible place. I mean, Orr statue's in front of the Garden where the Bruins play, and Ted Williams is outside of Fenway, and I'm sure Brady will have one down at Gillette someday. But I think that they could either build another one more prominent spot in Boston, or just reposition this thing just so that more folks see it.
How would you describe the rivalry between Russell and Chamberlain at the time, but on the court as compared to off the court, where they seem very friendly?
Sure. I mean, Wilt's mother would make dinner when Bill would go to Philadelphia, and Wilt was a much more outgoing, kind of gregarious guy, so he was easy for us. And I think that, Bill, I don't want to say Bill was smarter than Wilt Chamberlain in my view, and just knew how to exploit that. And because when the game started, he would do what he could do to outthink him. And that stuff worked to the point where the last game that they played against each other is the finals of game 69 finals. And, Wilt's got Jerry West and Elgin Baylor, and Russell's got a fourth place team, and Emmett Bryan starting. And they had no business winning that thing. And Russell scored 6 points, but beat Chamberlain, who asked out of the game. He got in foul trouble, didn't want to foul out because he never had, said it was an injury, and the coach wouldn't put him back in. And it was just a horrible way for it to end for Wilt. But Russell invariably found a way to beat Wilt, even though Wilt was bigger and more powerful and way better low post scorer than Bill Russell was.
He had a habit of throwing up before games. Did that last his whole career? His teammates talked about the sound being reassuring, like, okay, here we go. And he said it wasn't a nerves thing. It was just kind of a habit.
We weren't in the room, but everybody talked about that, and that was part of the folklore of one of the Celtic traditions, and that was his way of sort of announcing from the stall that he's ready to go tonight. I think it was a reassuring thing, and Sam Jones and Ramsey and Heinsohn and Red would talk about that. So, yeah, it was part of the folklore of, like, the parquet floor and the banners above.
Well, we've got you. You also examined the NFL in great depth. Wondering what you think about this latest stage of the Deshaun Watson developments.
Well, it seems like awfully light, and it's hard to believe that, not to apples and oranges, but Tom Brady gets 4 games for a competitive violation, deflating footballs, and you have this, crime against humanity in 6 games. It's just not good. And I don't know where it'll shake out. The commissioner, as we know, he seems to have powers that supersede some of these courts and with the basic agreements that the union signed. So I'm anxious to see how this plays out moving forward, because I would think the Ginger Hammer could do himself some PR good by trying to extend that and make it a little bit bigger than what he got.
Dan, who's going to call offensive plays for the Patriots?
Well, we always think it's just Bill, and he's certainly wearing it now and putting all the heat on himself. But I don't know whether they don't want to pay for people to have those titles, or he's being stubborn, or he's trying to keep the heat off his boys. What it is, but yeah, we've got a stubborn situation emerging here, and it'll just put more of a bullseye on Bill's back. And they've got a tough 4 games out of the gate, and they finish with a parade of great quarterbacks down the stretch. So they're in a tricky spot. They don't seem to be overwhelmed with talent, and they got a nice looking second-year quarterback, as we know. But the conference has kind of gone by him a little bit, and it's going to be interesting to see if Bill can reverse that course with his just coaching genius.
I was reading last week where some were saying that they thought Belichick would actually be the play caller. Is that realistic?
I guess it's Patricia right now, but he's not been an offensive guy, so no one knows anything. It's like this has been the case for 25 years down there. It's a very cloistered world, and this is the way Bill wants it, and more than ever, that's what we're seeing.
You can throw away the tomato can column now. You don't have to repurpose that every year. Unless
they are the tomato can.
Well, quite a spin that'll be. Look forward to that one.
Hey, thank you for reflecting on the life of Bill Russell on and off the court. We appreciate you as always. Always love chatting with you.
Enjoyed it, fellas. Take care.
All right, Dan Shaughnessy.
Terrific, as always.
Yeah, he's fantastic. Kobe Bryant did an interview, I forgot the outlet, Major Network, and he was telling at the time the story of Bill Russell and Chamberlain, and admitted to Kobe like the art of war type deal, like the rivalry they would have. And the cerebral aspect of what Russell would do is he would go play extremely hard against Chamberlain, of course, when the game was tight. But when the game was at hand and the Celtics were cruising, he would let up and let Chamberlain get his stats so that even in a loss, he felt good about how he played against Russell.
Mind games. And
then they got the loss. Chamberlain would get the MVPs, and Russell was cool with that because he was winning titles.
I was reading 2 or 3 different pieces today, and I can't remember which one was telling these stories, but that rivalry between Chamberlain and Bill Russell, and Bill Russell wrote about it, but people around Russell thought that while he knew that he was in his heart choosing the righteous path of devoting himself to winning and team and not being the star, where Chamberlain had the big personality, had the off-court fun, obviously, that everyone knows about and is legendary, but that part of Bill Russell maybe envied, how light Wilt Chamberlain was around people and the way he conducted himself and how polar opposite they were and how they went about their business. There was also an amazing story, and Dan told about the racism he faced in Boston, that there was one time his house was burglarized, people defecated in his home.
In their bed. They found that last.
Yeah, they smeared slurs all over the walls and everything else. And that they had a problem where his daughter, in her memoirs, wrote that every week their trash would be knocked over. And they have to go out and clean up the trash where someone was knocking the trash over. So he was complaining to the cops, and the cops said, oh, it's just raccoons doing that. So Bill said, well, where do I go register for a firearm to get rid of the raccoons? And they said from that moment on, there were no trash cans being tipped over at his house anymore after he brought that up to the cops. Really interesting stuff. Mom died when he was 12 years old, I think, of kidney failure, raised by a single dad who had a successful business in Louisiana, ended up having to work different jobs to make ends meet. But at the time, that really wasn't that accepted. There was an aunt trying to adopt the boys, and the dad said, no, I'm going to raise them on my own, and moved to Oakland eventually. Wasn't heavily recruited and won back-to-back national championships at the University of San Francisco. Just an incredible life well lived.
He's the all-time
Bill Russell. Interesting guy.
He's the all-time team sports winner, right?
Yeah, he's been described as the best winner in the history of team sports.
11 NBA, 2 college, and an Olympics.
And it's not just being on good teams. It's how he played and devoted himself to doing whatever it took. And not always scoring the most points, but to win the game.
Hit us up on Twitter at OutKick360. Coming up, we'll take over some headlines through the NFL, observations from training camps. Kyler Murray in the news as well today. We'll tell you the details on why he's going to miss a few practices this week. That's next on OutKick 360. OutKick 360 rolls on, 6th and Peabody, our location, with Yeehaw Beer and Old Smoky Moonshine. Kyler Murray has tested positive for COVID. So has head coach Pete Carroll for the Seahawks. You know, there's no COVID policy per se. However, if you are experiencing symptoms or if a trainer or physician at the facility feels as though you appear symptomatic, they can ask you to take a test. I don't know which of the two.
Then do they send you home
here.
until you're not symptomatic? Are they just common sensing it, I suppose?
Okay, well, he's out at least 5 days from the facility, I think is the rule. And then he's back in. So that's the update for the Cardinals is Murray is not there. Hopkins he's talked again on his suspension. He's got a 6-game suspension. He's going to be serving for violating the PED policy for the NFL. He still says, he's like, look, the rule is in there. I'll have to accept it, but I didn't knowingly take anything. And he reiterated that he barely takes vitamins as it is. But he's going to serve the 6-game suspension. Hit us up on Twitter at OutKick360. The schedule for the Cleveland Browns, not all that difficult.
They did this on purpose.
On paper.
Soft-loaded the front.
Tyler Castle on our staff, who's our resident Browns fan, sent an immediate text message this morning laying out the schedule. Very excited about those first 6 games if they're going to be without Deshaun Watson. Worked out very well for the Browns in all of this. Just from a football perspective, I don't think it could be much better if, in fact, the 6-game suspension holds. And it's no more than that. Of those first 6, I mean, how many of these games, Hutton, do we think that they could win with Jacoby Brissett or Josh Dobbs or Josh Rosen at quarterback?
Well, they're playing the Panthers.
I got it right in front of me.
Jets, Steelers, Falcons,
Jags.
Chargers.
Oh, no, sorry. I was looking. Sorry. My bad.
Panthers, Jets, Steelers, Falcons, Chargers, Patriots. And then as of right
Ravens
now,
is the first one he'd be back for.
See, get week 6, week 7 is the first time back for Deshaun Watson as it stands right now. That is a a road game against Baltimore. By the way, he can return to practice. He can return to the team facility after week 3, and he continues to be a part of training camp. Watson does, but now they know. As it sits right now, he's suspended for the first 6 games of the season.
I initially saw their schedule, and the preseason games weren't well labeled. Jaguars, Eagles, Bears. Jaguars, Bears in the 2 or 3 of the preseason, which would have been a hell of an easy start.
There's no given that they're going to win games with Jacoby Brissett, but with that schedule, based on what we think about those teams and the remaining roster there for Cleveland, which is a very talented roster, I mean, 4-2, 3-3 is a possibility, even with Jacoby Brissett at quarterback.
And you're afloat.
And then you're getting Deshaun Watson in late October. As you start, you're going to get one division game in those first 6, and then you're going to go. The first game back is going to be against Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. That's not all bad for Cleveland.
That game will be an event if that's his return game. Baker Bowl in that first thing, you can have a very motivated Baker Mayfield, but not a super talented Panthers team by any assessment.
It's also a big win for Jimmy Haslam. Again, as it looks today, he does not look like the GOAT of owners.
Took the gamble.
The bad version of the GOAT of owners here, because he was told no. Watson said the Browns are out of it. It was going to be the Falcons or the Saints. And Haslam came back and gave the fully guaranteed contract. This could have been an extremely poor decision, maybe the worst contract in the history of the league, had this gone as heavy-handed as what was being reported a couple of months ago.
Which it still could, but I think most of us are thinking that it'd be very hard for Goodell to come back and give him a season with an entry now, with a re-entry condition. Still on the table, but.
Well, again, and then the NFLPA would sue, and they would go to, or they would take it to appeals court, just like they did with Brady.
Yep.
Yeah, if it's anything more than the 2 more games, if he wanted to stay in the point of least resistance, I'll add 2 games because they're probably not going to appeal at that point. they could go that route. It's really not doing a ton. But I just keep coming back to, if Roger Goodell, because he screwed up the Ray Rice, they created a system to take him off the hook by appointing someone else who does this a lot of the time to administer punishment. He can just take that out and allow the 6 games to be the 6 games now, if he wanted to.
And if the NFL wants a full season, why are you negotiating for 12 games?
Well, I mean, it wasn't.
I think those reports are very strange to me, just in general. I think when those things are reported, it's just those are strange reports to me, because I'm with you. I'm thinking they're the NFL. If they want the full season, Roger Goodell can say, I'm adding 11 games to that 6 because we're not going to stand for this and we're going to give them a full season. If they really wanted to try that.
Well, they doesn't sound like they are going to, because of the NFLPA did not want to, and Watson's camp did not want to settle for 8 or for 12.
Well, 12 and 8 million.
Because they were getting a sense of what this was going to be.
Seems like.
And if the NFL is certainly getting the same type of, temperature gauge on what this is going to be, I think that's why the negotiations would be at 12 for a settlement where you have both parties agree to a certain suspension before you even hear from Sue Robinson.
And we've seen on the TV shows, you may be hesitant to negotiate, but you never know where the jury or the judge is coming down until you get it.
Watson was ordered to change his ways. We will tell you what else is in this report from Sue Robinson and the news of the day. We'll preview some NFL teams starting today. Today, that starts with the AFC North with the Ravens and Bengals. We've got that for you next. Second hour, OutKick 360 rolls on from 6th and Peabody with Yeehaw Beer and Old Smoky Moonshine. The crew is all here as well. Preview the AFC North with the Ravens and Bengals coming up in 20 minutes. A bit later, a look at the Major League Baseball trade deadline. We're inching closer to that. Some big moves today. With that, Deebo Samuel gets paid. Brett McMurphy from Action Sports Network will be with us in hour number 3. All of that and more coming up. Deshaun Watson suspended 6 games by the independent judge in this case, Sue L. Robinson, who, in reading through bits of her report, which was, 16 pages, I believe?
16
total?
pages,
15,
yeah.
16, yeah.
15, 16. One of the things that she points to is that Watson, according to NFL.com, Watson has been told he's got to get his massage therapy from club therapists. That is really the only change to the entire process of what has gone on that led to all of this. If you really sit back and think about, okay, if the NFL can up it from 6 games to 8 games or 8 to 12, at no point has he ever had to do anything to change the process or the repetitive behavior of what led to all of this. None of that has been addressed. Dan Patrick earlier today said that he had a source inside the negotiations for the settlement, and at no point did the word therapy come up. Not once, from either side. So this is more about games and getting it over with. And if that's the case, then just take your 6 games on both sides and go home.
Well, this guy cannot make another bad move. He cannot approach anybody on Instagram.
Right.
I mean, if he does something stupid like that, if he's got a problem in terms of a habit here that he can't break, he is going to shoot himself in the foot. And we're talking about, indefinite suspension for sure.
And it's more about, and it is, I mean, speaking the obvious a bit, it's more about conduct detrimental to the league than it is conduct detrimental to the massage therapists, the punishment itself.
Yeah.
So
in their own interest.
So it's not as though they're trying to correct any problem. They're punishing Watson for making the league look bad.
Yeah, and that's what this is all about at heart. I wanted to get into one thing that she wrote, Robinson, that I thought was very interesting, because about the league kind of tying itself in a knot here. I'm going to read you one paragraph of what she wrote on page 13 and 14, so near the end of her conclusion. I am bound, quote, by standards of fairness and consistency of treatment among players similarly situated, end quote. The NFL argues that consistency is not possible because there are no similarly situated players. By ignoring past decisions because none involve, quote, similar, end quote, conduct, however, the NFL is not just equating violent conduct with nonviolent conduct, but has elevated the importance of the latter without any substantial evidence to support its position. While it may be entirely appropriate to more severely discipline players for nonviolent sexual conduct, I do not believe it's appropriate to do so without notice of the extraordinary change this position portends for the NFL and its players. So she's basically calling out the league for looking to flip kind of the pecking order of violations here without any kind of change in rules or policy or anything like that.
Like unprecedented, the word unprecedented, that just stood out to us as we were discussing this for the last several months. She's saying, if I'm reading this and interpreting this right, she's saying they're trying to come back and make an unprecedented ruling when, in fact, they've never had anything like that for other matters. And when it has been harsh, it's been for violent behavior.
Yeah, everything has stacked in a relatively, what I'm reading, everything has stacked in a relatively reasonable and orderly fashion. And what they're asking for here goes outside of that structure. And look, I feel like it should have gotten more, but I can't argue with what she's saying there.
Yeah, and I can't.
Now, the violent versus nonviolent is going to be a big argument out in the community of domestic violence offense. I shouldn't call it community. In the domestic violence offense conversation. I think there's still going to be a big thing there because there's so many victims to this.
I don't want to hear arguments about time served because of last year.
I told you that was going to come up eventually.
He was being a jerk. That's why he sat out the year before. I mean, come on.
Like, and he was intending to sit out anyway.
I'm not giving him any credit for that season where he got paid.
He was going to do it anyway.
To do nothing. Yes, he had decided to be a jerk to his organization that drafted him before all this happened. I want him to get more punishment because of that, not people that are arguing, well, he sat out a season already. No, that has nothing to do with this story. Ken on our YouTube chat says, 6-game suspension for a guy who's been vindicated by 2 separate grand juries for lack of any evidence. Seems fair.
Well, see, here's the thing about that, though.
I think vindicated is a strong word to say.
Vindicated is a very strong word.
It's too strong of a word to say.
And the league does not accept, as crazy as this is, and I understand, but the league is not taking legal standards as its standards. I understand that that's not cool with most of us, but the league has decided about 20 years ago, our standard is higher than the legal standard for behavior. You get a DUI and you serve your punishment with the law and everything, that's fine, but that's not good enough for us. We're doing something above and beyond, yada, yada, yada. You get my drift. And they have taken to penalizing people before their civil and criminal cases have concluded in the legal system.
Well, it's also, I mean, it's quite possible. First off, everything Sue L. Robinson wrote in that 16-page report, I agree with her. If just reading through all the evidence and claims of 23 different women and everything else that we've seen, I believe everything she wrote. But there's also a chance, to what Ken's saying, which I disagree with Ken saying he's vindicated, he may be innocent of committing a crime in this thing. He is certainly guilty of behaving poorly and making women uncomfortable.
And conduct detrimental to the league.
It's not always criminal to make someone uncomfortable, right? I mean, there's a distinction there. Like, I'm no lawyer, and I'm not going to get into the legal differences here, but to not go forward with an indictment with a grand jury is rare for not to even have an indictment. That's a good mark for Deshaun Watson. But all that says is they're not indicting him of committing a crime. Doesn't mean that he's not guilty of some really poor behavior with masseuses. And that, to me, that's the difference with what the league is saying. You put the league's integrity at jeopardy because you did this over and over and over again, so much so that there's 23 women claiming in civil court that you did all of these bad things. I don't know the letter of the law exactly, but you can be guilty of doing bad things and not face jail time because you really haven't committed a crime.
And I think it absolutely meets the NFL standard of conduct detrimental to the league.
I don't want people to
which
hear
isn't
this
that hard to meet.
I don't want people to hear this and think that I'm, condoning doing everything. I'm just saying making someone uncomfortable doesn't mean that you committed a crime and you're going to go to jail.
It's also
you could just be behaving in a creepy fashion and making someone uncomfortable
repeatedly in his instance.
But
habitually.
To his point in the chat, it's also hard to overlook the fact that we did have those. You had the court system toss this, not move forward with the legal process,
the indictment,
in the criminal nature of this, and from the civil spots that I believe one case is still out there,
and it's
right?
Probably Ashley Solis.
It's not.
It's not.
She has settled.
I'm surprised. That really surprises me.
She's one of the 3 others this weekend who. It was reported that now 23 of the 24,
I'm dying
right,
to know these numbers. I can't believe they're not leaking out.
They have settled. It's hard to overlook that when it comes to any type of punishment, a former federal judge who, for the record, took her time, did not go by any timetable of. There were reports back in early June that the NFL wanted this wrapped up before camps open.
She didn't care.
And she took her time. She heard from both sides. She gave both sides ample amount of time to then make their closing arguments in written form in front of her. And we're a week and a half from that, I believe. Or is it 2 weeks now? 2 full weeks from that moment. And here we are a week and a half into training camp for some teams and others just 3 or 4 practices. And it's a much lighter punishment than what we would have expected. So those that have been behind the closed doors listening to the evidence of both sides tend to come back with a lighter punishment than the court of public opinion that we're doing on a daily basis here. So at some point we have to stop being shocked with the way this is going on, because this is continuing to play into Watson's favor whether we like it or not.
And it's also, I saw Dan Wolken and others had these, columns about the NFL shows once again they don't care. They hate women, basically. They don't care about women. Now, I said before, I wish the NFL would just be honest and say we are a business. They don't hate women. They don't want these bad things to happen to women. They're also not in the court of criminal justice to go and solve cases with their players and coaches against women. So I wish they would just stay away from
problem.
it
they think
and
they
completely do it.
They think they are.
But they don't right now. This is why they put
they
forth
don't
these
do well.
things.
Well, they think
They're not equipped.
But Paul, they have Sue L. Robinson for that reason.
Right.
Even if begrudgingly Roger Goodell gave it up, which he still has, veto power basically to come back and say what he wants on it, this is their out. Like, you can write every column in the world about the NFL hates women or hates this or hates that. Write the column about Sue L. Robinson. Show me her record. To show me where she hates women.
Yeah, it's not
or
her,
she's not going to look at the evidence.
It's the investigation that's put in front of her that's so limited that to pretend that hey, we gave Sue Robinson the full case for her to investigate is just crap.
Well,
the NFL, I've said this the whole time since they started doing this, and I don't know what the solution is, because it was ridiculous, too, to have a criminal guy under Paul Tagliabue playing when they said, we're going to wait for the justice to run its course, when justice would be 2 years to wait for a speedy trial, which is nonsense also. It put the league in a tough spot, but they went from one extreme, we'll just wait for the legal system, to another extreme, we'll conduct our own investigation with no subpoena power and people who don't want to talk to us. There's something in the middle, but they haven't found it. But I'm not doubting Sue Robinson's qualifications. I'm doubting what's put in front of Sue Robinson to have. She's limited.
But here's when you read the report, it's Sue Robinson has said, now I am going by what I'm given by the NFL investigation.
Which to me is insufficient.
But then she also goes on and says, it is their job, these two former prosecutors that were the main investigators, to prove their case of these three things. They proved all three to her.
Right.
So what are they lacking? In fact, they interviewed 12 of the women, and they took out 8 that didn't support their case. And they went with 4. 3 of them are licensed masseuses. 1 did not have a license, but agreed to perform a massage on Deshaun Watson. So,
I think they're lacking the ability to prove the scope that the league feels like there is to it.
Well, the league feels like there is to it. The league did the investigation. They handed over.
Right. Well,
handed over enough to basically indict him in her eyes on all 3 charges.
But not
and
to
her
get
conclusion
the
was
sentence,
6 games.
But not to get the sentence they wanted. So they were successful on the conviction, so to speak, but they weren't effective based on what they wanted for the sentencing.
I don't know what they would be holding out, though, based on everything that's out there and if they're going to interview 12 women. I mean, personally, if I'm actually looking at all of the evidence of something, which she's not, she's dealing with, I want to know why they took out the other 8 women that they talked to.
Right, I do
because
too.
they weren't credible.
And they're not transparent.
Well, isn't that part of the case?
So they initially presented 5 cases, but one of them was just named through a media report, so she excluded that from her consideration. So it ended up being 4.
But, Chad, even if they did this investigation perfectly, which I doubt, their history of poor investigations makes me not have a lot of faith in the NFL's ability to investigate things because they're not an investigative body.
Well, I look at the Major League Baseball system. They got Trevor
Also
Bauer 2
terrible.
seasons. And I'm thinking, why are we not asking more questions about that with no criminal charges? 2 seasons? I mean, the amount of money he's losing and everything that happened. I mean, I don't think, Paul, to your point, and what I think we're both saying, none of these leagues are equipped to do this.
Yeah.
I think the MLB probably botched it the other way. NFL may be botching it this way, but at least the NFL turned this over to people who are professionals who have done this for a living, and 2 former DAs and prosecutors to investigate, and then Sue L. Robinson, a federal judge, to be a judge on this. I just don't want Roger Goodell touching it.
It's better. One thing that would fix it, though, and look, I'm not saying they should do it for the leagues. I'm saying they should do it for the country. Let's get back to something where if you're arrested or charged or whatever, this civil case now, the one remaining civil case, isn't going to be heard until next spring. Well, let's get back to a system where bleep happens in a relatively quick fashion. And it's not hanging over everybody's head. And I'm not saying this civil case outweighs. There are tons of criminal cases that take far too long when you're supposed to get a speedy trial and resolution. And we've gotten way too far away from that. That's an American bureaucratic problem that I'm talking about. That's much bigger than the scope of what we're talking about, but it's at the root of this problem as well.
The Cleveland Browns, by the way, have released a statement on this 6-game ruling. You guys ready for this?
Yeah.
Can we go with this now?
Is it complete legalese?
This is a statement from D and Jimmy Haslam. I always find it fascinating to see the choice of words when you are the non-apology, apologizing for something but not claiming guilt in anything and how you apologize. And see if you guys and everyone listening right now can catch exactly what I'm saying with this. Throughout this process, Deshaun and his representatives have abided by the newly created and agreed upon process for the NFLPA and the NFL to defer to the objective judge, Sue L. Robinson, to comprehensively review all information and make a fair decision. We respect Judge Robinson's decision and at the same time empathize and understand that there have been many individuals triggered throughout this process. We know Deshaun is remorseful that this situation has caused much heartache to many, and he will continue the work needed to show who he is on and off the field. And we will continue to support him.
Something for everybody.
So once again, same time, we empathize and understand that there have been many individuals triggered throughout this process. We know Deshaun not sorry for anything he's done. We know Deshaun is remorseful that the situation has caused heartache to many.
The situation, not him, but the situation.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's very important
I went through a lot of lawyers.
Go through words that is not, because Deshaun Watson has not been a bit remorseful in front of the media.
Because
has not admitted any guilt to any of this.
Yeah, right.
So again, we know Deshaun is remorseful that the story, the situation, not that he's guilty, the situation has caused heartache to many. It's important to note how they distinguish between the two.
Talk about parsing words. I mean, it's a masterpiece,
it's
really.
It's a smartly
if you think
worded
about,
statement from the Browns.
If you think about what they're trying to do, it's
many
masterfully done.
Yes, many will hate it, but it's a very smartly worded statement by someone in that organization. And I don't think Jimmy Haslam wrote that out.
No.
Or D. Haslam, for that matter.
Or their PR.
It's a statement from
that's
Jimmy
beyond,
and D. Haslam, but I don't think either one wrote it.
That's like somebody went to law school and marketing school and PR school and finance, everything.
A little bit, yes. Jack of all trades.
And in typical fashion, someone from Watson's camp earlier this morning relayed some information. They felt like the 6-game suspension was too harsh. Just to get that out there.
I wonder what kind of practice he had today.
I don't know. Well, he's been splitting
focused.
reps,
He's focused.
That's the other thing. We haven't really heard how he's been on the practice field. It's all been about what the reps have been, sharing reps, and how they're going about preparing for week 1, and now the first 6 weeks of the season. We'll get back into this. Armando Salguero is going to join us in about 45 minutes, and we'll continue the discussion on the news of the day with the 6-game suspension for Deshaun Watson and what's next for the NFL. They have up to 3 days to inform everyone involved of a possible appeal, and that would then go, as it stands right now, it would go in front of Goodell. Goodell can choose to put someone in that position to hear it.
Maybe he throws Troy Vincent under the bus.
Maybe. But, even
or somebody we've never heard of. That would be even better. Then he could fire that person in a year.
You hate to be the guy or girl in the NFL office right now.
Sacrificial lamb.
It's like, I need to be more recognizable. I'm calling up Schefter and others. Can you get my name out there so I'm not so anonymous when I get rolled under the bus?
This was one of the points of emphasis in the recent CBA negotiations, where the NFL generally wins a lot of these negotiations. One of the main points was discipline and
Goodell's
power being judge, jury, and executioner. And what they're referencing, the Browns referencing in this statement, came from an owner, which Goodell would have been representing in these negotiations, where they're pointing to this is a fair process that we agreed to, both sides agreed to, with the independent judge overseeing situations like this. Not just this one, but all of them.
Saying, let's be done.
That's right. And now, if you're the NFLPA, you're saying we negotiate that in good faith. At the time, of course, this was not going on, so you didn't know what you were going to be seeing or hearing in front of you. But now if the NFL doesn't like it and they come back and go the opposite direction where everyone's stunned at the 6 games, what would shock us, at least me, is if Goodell comes back and says full season, right? And you really tack it on like we were thinking they were trying to do.
11 more games is a lot, more than double.
Right. So if you do that, then what does that say about the CBA negotiations and what you tried to implement and the process you just went through for the last 3 months?
It says, I held on to my power.
Well, it's a show.
Yeah.
It
shows, again, how weak the PA side
or,
of it is.
If you believe in the process, then he does nothing.
Right.
But administer the 6-game suspension that the NFLPA and the Browns have already agreed to. And you move on.
But he kept final say for a reason.
But if you are trying to, we're going back to the word optics. If you are trying to appeal to optics and writers and media members, then he'll come back and give them more games or try to, because that's the only way that's the only way that a segment of society is going to be appeased, is if you show that you're tougher than someone else on this.
It's not just optics, though. There's some power here. He likes power, and he's got power.
I also think he likes his job more than anything else, and I really feel like NFL owners would rather him not touch something like this when it goes to this.
I think NFL owners are still pissed about that contract.
There's also talk that he's retiring soon.
So what's then it's a legacy question.
Yeah. I mean,
his legacy is going to be fine.
Yeah.
Because he made money.
His legacy is the
TV
billions.
His legacy is just the monster that is the NFL under his watch.
He didn't mess that up. But who would have?
Right now, Week 7, first game back for Watson, is against the Baltimore Ravens. They're first up in our preview as we look ahead to the NFL season. AFC North Ravens and Bengals will dissect both next in OutKick 360. OutKick 360 rolls on. NFL season just around the corner. Got preseason games starting up soon, and then joint practices, more preseason games, and look on the bright side, there's only 3 of those now.
Woohoo!
And then we finally get to week 1 on September 11th, Sunday, September 11th, and of course the Thursday, the 10th, or the 9th, excuse me, we have the opening game.
We have a Hall of Fame game this week.
On the 4th, yeah.
So we'll have an NFL game, in air quotes. We'll have one of those this week in the Hall of Fame game. Do we see a single starter in that game on either side? Kickers? Kickers are going to get some work, I think. The starting kicker will.
So few.
I would not.
Who's someone else we can get out here to risk pulling a
Well,
groin
you
muscle?
have time. The thing is, this game is so early, you have time for a guy to get hurt and recover before the regular season.
Yeah.
Let me quickly
Terms of a
look up
hamstring.
the quarterback matchups for us. So we've got the Jags, right?
Yeah,
Jags, Raiders, right?
C.J. Beathard likely to get the start for the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Can't wait.
Thrill a minute.
Middle Tennessee kid.
And former New Orleans Breakers quarterback Kyle Sloter.
Oh, yes.
We've seen that.
He is going to put on a show.
You know
He's already done it with the Vikings before. In the
who's going to
preseason.
put on a show this preseason? The USFL. There's going to be a lot of USFL players playing an NFL preseason game. That's my prediction.
The Baltimore Ravens getting their quarterback back. Lamar Jackson leads our discussion as we preview the 2022 Baltimore
Hutton
Ravens.
quickly, because this is breaking news, and I'm just
Okay,
now
yeah.
seeing it. It involves your Orioles. Got some bad news for you on the Orioles.
They're sellers.
Trey Mancini has
Where?
been traded to the Houston Astros.
Oh, come
Trey
on,
Mancini,
Hut.
a great player, going to the team that Paul fears the most in the American League, the Houston Astros.
Damn it, T. Damn you.
And the Orioles are
How
red
dare
hot.
you.
I mean, I don't know what they've done here recently. I don't think they
They're
played
still
very
in
well
wild
against the
card
Reds.
contention.
I feel like the Reds took it to them this weekend. At least because I bet on the Orioles a couple times and did not win those bets. That's the only reason I know. But the Orioles are upward trajectory this season.
That's
They've
disappointing.
been better.
They have a chance to be above 500 at the end of the year.
I will let you know, Hutton, what they got in return. I've not seen
No,
yet
I'm
what
sure
they
you've heard of
received.
all of them.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard of every one of
None of
them
the guys
because you're
have played.
reading all of those. The Orioles are 51-51, 3 out of the wild card.
Yeah, they're
I
having
mean, if
a
you're
very
3 out of the wild card, what are you doing
a
giving up your best
respectable
field player?
season for the Orioles? I mean, they've exceeded expectations this season, and they're 500. That's a good season,
I know.
especially for the Orioles.
When's
They're
the
having a
last
good
time you've
season.
been 3 out of the wild card in August?
It was my first year as a fan, like 5 years ago.
Well, I wonder how close
That's
Mancini
disgusting.
is to becoming a free agent,
He
where the
must be
Orioles are
close.
saying we're not going to afford him
Yeah.
when he comes up
So
to
we
free
better
agency. So
cash out.
let's go ahead and get some pieces that can help us continue to be respectable in the meantime. So we'll see if it works.
Pisses me off.
They're not getting any pieces.
We had our tribute to our buddy Mark Howard last week, who knew everything about Swedish and Finnish hockey players in the draft.
Canadian.
Hutton's now going to become an expert on Venezuelan and Dominican baseball prospects based on the Orioles trades. You're going to know the whole feeder system here soon enough. So we're going to find out what they got in return.
Good season, bad season, it doesn't matter. Sellers. The O's. Sellers.
Always sellers.
Dumping that salary.
They're going to be in first place a year from now, beating the Yankees in the division. Then they're just going to sell. They're going to clean house. What are you guys doing? You're in first. It's our mentality. You
Yeah.
can't break that mentality with one good season.
Always looking to get better.
Lamar Jackson is back for the Ravens. And as we begin our 2022 previews, what a storyline he's going to be this year. Look, he is the all-time, for quarterbacks, he's the all-time winner under the age of 25 at the position. He set that mark.
All time.
All time. And
Crazy.
he's a former MVP. But we still have questions about Lamar Jackson delivering the football down the field. This is a tight end heavy team. They traded Hollywood Brown to the Arizona Cardinals on draft day. They drafted not one, but 2 tight ends in this draft. And they are, of course, a run-based team as well. J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards are on PUP coming off of injuries from last year. Last year was going perfectly. They were 8-3. And with 6 games to go, after already catching an injury bug where they had Marcus Peters go down in preseason, They also lose Marlon Humphrey. They lose their running backs. Ronnie Stanley was banged up and out. They've had plenty of injury questions and lost all of their final 6 games. They finished a game below 500 at 8-9 after starting the season 8-3. They were the number 1 seed in the AFC with 6 games to play. And, of course, Lamar Jackson ties into that because he was also hurt and missed those games. So with him returning and knowing that they have Mark Andrews at tight end and knowing that they have loaded up in a massive way at that position, the next step is trying to get these receivers involved. And that therein lies some past draft picks, Paul, where they're going to be expecting a big jump in production for certain players now that Hollywood Brown's not there.
Well, the number 1 guy on that list to me is Rashad Bateman. They've been looking, and this was last offseason where they couldn't get guys to come. They kept having free agent conversations, negotiations, and they went somewhere else. Then Hollywood Brown says, hey, it's no offense to Lamar Jackson, but I need to get out of here because of the system. Well, the system and Lamar Jackson are one in the same. So that wasn't real complimentary.
Yeah, Lamar Jackson is the system.
Yeah,
everything is based around his skill set.
And we know what the issue is there. They don't throw outside beyond 10 yards, for sure. It kind of limits the scope of the passing offense, and that's where he's got to prove it. And look, I have a lot of respect for the Ravens. I think the Ravens are a good team. I think they're, right there in the playoff picture every year. But I don't know once they get in the playoffs if they're a team that can get on the run because I think they can be figured out. Now, they figured the Titans out one time, but they went 1 game, right? They got figured out by the Titans when they were the number 1 seed, when the Titans got on their little mini run and went to the AFC Championship. I find it hard, Hutton, to envision them getting on a run because I think if you could stop them from running, hit them in the mouth early like the Titans did in that game, get a lead on them, you limit them. And they're a team with a recipe that it has to kind of go one way. And they're very good if they go that one way. But if you can knock them off that one way, it's hard for them. And they can do it in the regular season. But then when you stack up a list of 4 consecutive really good opponents in the offseason who are going to have good play callers, good defenses, I think it's hard for them to perpetually win with Lamar and that limited scheme, which isn't the worst thing. Tennessee's in a similar situation. They have a team that's good enough to go to the playoffs and then kind of has a script it needs to follow that's hard to follow all the way to the Super Bowl. Do you want that team or do you want a team that's got, a chance to go to the playoffs once every 5 years?
Hutton, you love a guy in a playoff in a contract year also. I mean, Lamar Jackson, he may end up getting a new contract before the season starts.
Well, last year was the gamble for him, and he played through it, and he's still going to get the final money now.
It was an awful season for him in every respect based on the health stuff.
I am curious, though, for a guy who doesn't have an agent, how much that factors in with how he's going to go about this. I like them this year. I mean, I like what they have coming back. It's just, by the way, if you're a team dealing with a guy that doesn't have an agent, does that make you want that player more? Because you don't have to deal with an agent?
I think it makes you want to negotiate more.
Right?
Hell
like,
yeah.
I thought about that. That's oddly a selling point for Lamar Jackson, I feel like, for the organization.
Though for the longest time, he wouldn't sit down. So
this is great because he's like, I don't have enough time to really negotiate because I'm all about football right now. So, there's going to be a cutoff time where I'm not going to talk about contract anymore. I mean, don't you love that if you're the coach and you're the GM? Not having to deal with that, or would you just prefer not to have to deal with the player there?
A lot of guys say that with their agent once the season starts. They don't want it happening even though somebody else is dealing with it.
The other point for the Ravens, and I'm with you, Paul, like I think the Titans vibe is kind of the same tone here, where I expect them to be in the playoffs, and then it's the proving season.
Yeah. I
believe the year that they were the number 1 seed and they beat the Titans, I believe they ran into the Chiefs and lost. Same goes for the Titans. The year they went to Baltimore and won, they ran into the Chiefs along that playoff run.
Next game.
And so, can they go on a run in the postseason? Yes, they can, because
they've done it before. That's one thing.
If Lamar Jackson plays,
Lamar.
I mean, we've seen him take over the league and be the Was it
unanimous?
Was it unanimous? Or
I
was
think
it
it was
nearly
unanimous.
Unanimous MVP, and he was that good and unstoppable. They've added Kyle Hamilton through the draft, who is going to certainly step up in that secondary. A secondary with Marcus Peters and Marlon Humphrey and Kyle Fuller.
It's a terrific group.
They have a solid group up front and really good on all three levels of this defense. Where Tyus Bowser now, who was a backup and just kind of a different packages type guy.
He's a breakout guy this year.
He's now a starter in this defense.
He's on PUP also. They got a lot of guys on PUP to start.
Yep. So they Patrick Queen and Josh Bynes at linebacker. He's back. So they've got they've re-signed him. They have pieces defensively, and then offensively they trade Hollywood Brown, and left in the starting lineup at receiver are Rashad Bateman, Devin Duvernay, a speedster, and then James Proche. So
Mike McDonald is a new defensive coordinator, which is a bit of a weird transition because Wink Martindale 2 years ago was hot. Last year, the injuries undid everything, and all of a sudden they were done with him, and he's now with the Giants, if I'm not mistaken. Kind of a weird shift. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there with McDonald, who is a Michigan guy, friends with Harbaugh's brother, or so that's a pipeline there. But it'd be interesting to see how that defense reshapes itself.
And also, I mentioned 8-3 to begin the year. They had a ton of one-score games and game-winning kicks through Justin Tucker.
Best in the biz.
But they also lost in that area too. They lost to the Lions, didn't they?
Yes.
Or was it the?
No, they beat the
They beat the Lions.
They beat the Lions with a Tucker 64-yard field goal.
That's right. Yeah. So the Lions were the ones with the close losses, and the Ravens are winning the close battles in the fourth quarter. And there's something to that. You know, the line of demarcation in the NFL is not all that great, but if you're in the tight quarters of the fourth quarter and you've got to step up and make a play, the Ravens generally do late in those games. But to what Paul's pointing to, we're judging them based on the postseason. We expect them to be back, especially with 7 teams getting into the AFC. When we come back, we discuss the Cincinnati Bengals, who are trying not just to get back to the Super Bowl, but win it. That's next on OutKick 360. Joe Burrow was back at Cincinnati Bengals practice today. OutKick 360 rolls on. He wasn't practicing. He wasn't in uniform. He was on a scooter. He had the appendectomy last week. And he may not be able to throw for a few days, or a few weeks, rather. Couple weeks. I don't want people thinking few means 5.
Few means 3, generally.
Yeah, couple.
Couple means 2.
And they, for early on, I guess with the stitching, he can't sweat because of the stitching of whatever went on.
Sucks.
And then, it's just, he had surgery. He's getting back into it. So the Bengals trying to get back into the postseason and make that same run they just were on throughout the AFC. Your defending AFC champion Cincinnati Bengals. Next up in our team preview series from the AFC North, our final one for today. Hayden Hurst is now their tight end. They feel as though they have upgraded in that area. Reporters in Cincinnati, based on the first week of observation, tend to agree with the organization on the plays that Hurst has been making through the first week or so. The big questions for them are twofold. Number one, offensive line, which was horrendous a year ago. They have revamped that on the right side of their offensive line. They have Lyle Collins at right tackle and Alex Kappa, who's in at right guard, and Ted Karras, who is the center now, the starting center for Cincinnati. And that should help significantly with their star quarterback in Joe Burrow. We know they have their run game with Joe Mixon. We know they have talent at receiver, not just Jamar Chase, but T. Higgins and others. But the questions will be on defense. First and foremost, what happens with Jesse Bates, who's a holdout right now, wanting a new contract. And they have drafted a new safety in Dax Hill. They addressed that issue in the early portions of this year's NFL draft. And they will, again, go through a gauntlet of an AFC schedule. They did it last year, but organizationally, they've admitted it will be a different approach, knowing that you're being hunted instead of being the one hunting the teams in front of you.
I absolutely love what they did on the offensive line. Oftentimes when you have a glaring problem, you'll address it to a smaller degree and you'll make it out like, well, we can overcome that. We're not as bad. They admit it. They sucked on the offensive line. They needed an overhaul. They made 3 substantial moves. They're just completely reinvented there, which is what they needed. That's why I'm high on the Bengals, higher than most people. I got one giant concern on the Bengals, Eli Apple. Now, they drafted a 2nd-rounder and a 5th-rounder, Cam Taylor-Britt and Tyson Anderson at corner. I need for the Bengals to transform their second problem area, those 2 guys or one of those 2 guys to develop, right? Mike Hilton, I don't love either at nickel, but Dax Hill is being talked about as a nickel. And I like that idea. So if these 2 young corners can develop, I like their pass rush. And this is a formula that works. The Bucs did it 2 years ago. Titans are trying to do it now. If you've got a veteran pass rush that can get to the quarterback, and you've got young talent in the secondary, particularly at corner, with some veteran safeties, and I think Bell will be back, that's a defensive winning formula. So are these young corners going to be good enough to supplement somebody like Eli Apple who gets burned too much? If so, listen, I know the team doesn't make it back and everything, but maybe Joe Burrow makes this different.
And how much does the Cleveland suspension of Watson help the Bengals get off? If they get off to a nice start, they can, in essence, lead the division.
I'm not worried about the Steelers.
Before Watson comes back.
I think the Steelers are playing a different kind of ball.
Worried about the Browns, in that division.
And maybe less about the Browns.
But keep in mind, the Bengals were playing well at the beginning of last year. They had a couple of games on the road. They won on the road at Baltimore, and they won on the road at Pittsburgh early in the season.
Which really kind of fortified that team that needed to learn how to win. That
was a significant mark for them, like under the belt. But I think that's to what they're pointing to now is that it's not as much the expectation. Oh, it is expectation. It's not as much about being hunted. I would say it's about dealing with expectation and the attention that they're now the microscope's on them now instead of on their opponent.
And we joked about how long it took them to sell out. as a defending AFC championship. But the fact of the matter is they are sold out. Atmosphere at that place, and you and I have been there for a lot of games that didn't have any atmosphere. It'll have atmosphere now. Going to Cincinnati will be different than it's been for those division rivals and everybody else in a long, long time.
They have a solid kicking game too, Chad.
Well,
I mean, they're in it.
I love that, the only two not voted off the island on the offensive line, Jonah Williams, Jackson Carman on the left side, the complete revamping of the line from center, right guard, right tackle. Paul, you'd mentioned it, but just completely going after the problem area and addressing it. I think the defense is going to be just as good. Joe Burrow was the best quarterback in the league the last 5 games of the season. He's 72.3% completion percentage. He cut down on the interceptions. Interceptions can be a problem with Burrow. That's one thing that could trip them up. But I really think if we're not looking at Cincinnati as a team to be right there in the Super Bowl mix again, we're just simply saying, well, history shows the team that loses the Super Bowl takes a step back. On paper, they're really, really good.
They're better.
Yeah, I mean, why not, I guess would be my question for Cincinnati this year, other than looking at the history of the losing Super Bowl team, not typically faring well the next year. But I look at their schedule, even in a tough division, team they have coming back, and I think this is a team that can win the Super Bowl.
Here's another guy that benefits from the offensive line stuff who gets ignored a lot. Joe Mixon.
Yeah.
Pretty damn steady.
Yes.
And this line isn't going to hurt him by any means either.
But
and they got 3 terrific receivers.
There was also a point in the season last year when they went from I felt like a run-first team to
Burrow
the first threat was Burrow pushing it down the field to Chase.
Which is how they should be, probably.
And, oh, by the way, those division opponents, even the secondary banged up in Baltimore, still, Chase was scorching those guys throughout those matchups.
That's one of the best combinations in the league off that one season.
It's remarkable that they allowed 70 sacks. So they were sacked 51 times. Burrow was sacked 51 times in the regular season last year.
And it didn't slow up in the postseason.
Yeah, he was sacked 70 times total. Now that
9 here in the second round of the playoffs.
To get there, go from 51 to 70, you need to play some games in the playoffs, and they did. But it's remarkable they went on the run they did, considering how many times the quarterback – that's how many times he was sacked. He was hit many other times. He was hit in the playoff game against the Tennessee Titans here in Nashville where it looked like he hurt his knee and on a play that didn't even count. In reality, they sacked him 11 or 12 times that day.
Because they got some offsides and the like. He and that had to be scary. Think of what Zach Taylor and the Brown family's thinking as he takes all of those hits a year after he tore his ACL. I mean, that's why they went into the offseason. They had to think, we got really lucky. I mean, we had a miracle Super Bowl season, and our guy didn't get hurt a year after he got badly hurt. We've got to invest in those offensive linemen, and they did.
If the team is a reflection of its quarterback handling adversity and handling the attention and the expectation, the Bengals are just fine with Joe Burrow, with Joe Cool under center or in shotgun running that team.
I might pick him in the AFC.
I mean, they acted like they belonged last year as a surprise team. And now we're writing them off again. Not Paul. We're writing them off again when we talk about Super Bowl contention. We'll hit the headlines, including Watson's suspension next with Armando Salguero. We'll be talking college football with Brett McMurphy coming up in 20 minutes. OutKick 360 rolls on across the OutKick network. Crew is all here. Great staff as well. 6th and Peabody with Yeehaw Beer and Old Smoky Moonshine. Come by and see us next time you're in Music City. We're about to be joined by Armando Salguero. The big headline today, Judge Sue L. Robinson, former federal judge, the independent judge in this case for Deshaun Watson, announced a 6-game suspension for Deshaun Watson from the Cleveland Browns. And we've been diving into that over the last 2 hours. We continue right now as we begin the final hour of the Monday edition with Armando Salguero of OutKick.com. He's been covering this at the site. Armando, good to see you. Hope you had a great weekend.
I had a good weekend. I wouldn't say it was a great weekend, but, I'll take good weekends anytime I can have one.
Good weekend for Deshaun Watson, all things considered?
Good weekend for Deshaun Watson. Not such a good Monday. He was not, from what I've been told, happy that he is being suspended for 6 games. Having said that, I think that if you read the decision, I come away feeling like he got off kind of light.
Yes, we all do here as well.
Right. And I have significant issues with not so much the decision, but also how it was reached. And FYI, I'm sure you guys all had television training. Once upon a time, I worked at ESPN. I have the decision right here. I hold in my hand.
The TV's playing tricks on you.
Yeah, former NFL judge, former federal judge Sue L. Robinson's decision. It's a 16-page report. It's interesting reading. The entire text is on OutKick.com if you're interested in going to read it. But, I'll just let you guys ask me questions. But I've got some issues.
Well, a few things in this that we have taken away, but again, we agree that the 6 games seems light, given the fact that she makes it very clear in this that she found no reason not to believe the women in this case, and that something did happen, more likely than not, with all of this. But yet she points to several other mitigating factors as to why she came to a solution of 6 games, which one of them is past suspensions. But she also points to the fact that he has settled these cases, all but one, and the fact that she also mentions the 2021 season in this, and that he did not play, and that had he been on the commissioner's exempt list or the leave list, he would have been granted credit for, if not time served. If you wanted to go heavier here, it would have been the full season credited for games missed. I found that very odd.
Odd. The NFL had a 3-pronged case, and according to the judge herself, the independent disciplinary officer, the NFL proved its 3-pronged case. The NFL alleged that Deshaun Watson was guilty of sexual assault, and she agreed. The NFL alleged that Deshaun Watson caused, conduct that was dangerous to himself and other individuals, and she agreed. The NFL alleged that Deshaun Watson engaged in conduct that was detrimental
to the league,
to the team, and she agreed. So basically, she's saying everything that the NFL is saying is true. She agreed and believed everything that the witnesses were telling her. She basically dismissed the categorical denial by Deshaun Watson, saying that he hadn't done anything wrong and had never even disrespected a woman. She dismissed that out of hand as not plausible. And then still, despite this preponderance and mountain of evidence, there's only a 6-game suspension. It's stunning to me.
What do you think the NFL will do now with Roger Goodell holding the power to review and revise this, or to pass it on to someone out of his office to review and revise this?
Yeah, Paul. So the NFL has 3 days to appeal officially, and that means 9 a.m. on, let's see, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. 3 days. And if they choose that option, then the commissioner himself has the option of ruling on appeal or designating someone to rule on his behalf. My guess is he will not be ruling on anything. If the NFL appeals, and that's still an if, he is going to pick someone to go ahead and hand down the final verdict. Having said that, the NFL is in a tough situation. The NFL set this process up. I believe it was, what was it, 2014? And then again in 2018, so that Roger Goodell would be out of the picture and out of the business of handing down sanctions to the players of the league. So it's tough for the NFL to disagree on the one hand with the decision and appeal, and then on the other hand say that this is the right way to do it and the process is solid and good as we've authored it. It's just it's a rock and a hard place that the NFL finds itself in.
Armando Salguero, our guest from OutKick.com.
So do we think if he does pass it off to somebody in his office that they will in fact be acting independently, or will they be doing the will of the league and its commissioner and have their name attached to this, but actually be doing the will of the commissioner?
Yeah, I mean that we're going into, I know what someone is thinking territory, and I know what's in someone's heart.
What's your best guess though?
My best guess is that if they pick someone, that person will give every vibe of being independent and, ultimately fine for a harsher penalty.
Armando, the other thing that I would have to consider if I'm Goodell, if I'm the league, is this: if you're going to appeal, if you're going to change what Judge Robinson laid out this morning, you're also going to face the appeals process in court. I think the NFLPA would treat it in similar fashion what happened with Brady. The appeals court denied Brady's case there, the NFLPA's case on that suspension, and they pointed to the CBA and pointed to the rules in place that said Goodell had the authority. But given the fact that the reports were a month ago or so that they wanted to get this out of the way before the season got here, if that's true, if you come down with a harsh sentence like you want, you're facing much further litigation that's only going to drag the story out longer. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do to just bury it, but in the court of public opinion, do you think they consider that and just get it out of the way?
This is a great point brought up by you, Jonathan, and I'm going to take credit for it. So thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Enjoy.
Thank you very much. No, but here's the thing. Everything you said is true. The NFL risks litigation if they appeal this, and then through the appeal process, something worse happens for Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson can then sue the NFL, and the NFL is not afraid of litigation. The NFL wins litigation. The NFL is very good at litigation. But the NFL is afraid of bad public relations. And it is bad public relations for the NFL if they appeal, they hurt Deshaun Watson more. He goes to court and he's on the field the first game of the season for the Cleveland Browns because the appeal has not, the court hearing has not been heard, and it's not going to be heard for a while. And not only is he on the field for the first game, he might be on the field for all season long. And suddenly what the NFL is looking at is we tried to, exact a greater punishment, and it looks like PR, public relations, admittedly, it looks like he's actually gotten off lighter by being on the field when he was supposed to be obviously suspended.
Armando, I'm going to read you a couple lines from the statement from Dee and Jimmy Haslam of the Cleveland Browns and get your response. We respect Judge Robinson's decision and at the same time empathize and understand that there have been many individuals triggered throughout this process. We know Deshaun is remorseful that this situation has caused much heartache to many, and he will continue the work needed to show who he is on and off the field. Very careful to continue the line about Deshaun Watson saying to the media he has no regrets and not taking really any responsibility in all of this. What did you make of the statement from the Cleveland Browns, which I think was very cleverly worded by them?
Really? I thought it opened the door to contradiction because, Chad, they're saying that Deshaun Watson is showing remorse. And here on page 14 of this decision, Judge Robinson writes, with respect to what the appropriate discipline should be, I note that there are aggravating factors applicable to Mr. Watson. That is his lack of expressed remorse and his tardy notice to the NFL of the first filed lawsuit. So the judge is memorializing that Deshaun Watson is not and was not at any point during this investigation remorseful. So what is this remorse stuff?
Well, I think it's very clever wording gymnastics by them because someone replied to me on Twitter and said the same thing. I think there's a difference, Armando, between personal regret over doing something and then sitting back and seeing the response to something you feel like you didn't do, but I'm remorseful that this situation. Note, I'm not remorseful. We know Deshaun is remorseful that this situation has caused so much heartache. Not Deshaun is remorseful that his actions caused heartache. Not remorseful that Deshaun did something to cause harm or heartache, but he's sitting back saying, hey, I'm really sad that people see this story and are annoyed, are hurt by it, or as the Browns use the word, triggered by it. I think it's very clever, but it's two different distinctions by them.
Yeah, and that is quite possibly the case, but the Cleveland Browns are a football team, not a gymnastics team, and certainly not a verbal gymnastics team, and they stink at the verbal gymnastics because the bottom line is, has Deshaun Watson apologized to any of these women? No. Has Deshaun Watson shown remorse for his actions, which by definition and in this decision is defined as including sexual assault? The answer to that is no. So this remorse stuff and the thesaurus of remorse and what it might be, and is there a there, and what does is really mean? Nobody's buying this.
I've got no issue with the thesaurus of remorse that you're saying. My point is the word situation. If they said, we know Deshaun Watson is remorseful that he did this, is different. Being remorseful over the situation, I think, are two different things. Here's what I'd like to know, Armando. I don't think we'll ever know. Was he asked to apologize as part of his settlement with these women? I wonder if that was. Now, we'll never know because there's probably an NDA.
They're definitely.
But I wonder if he had to own up to anything as part of it, because that happens a lot of times in settlement. A handwritten apology, a notice
call
to them that you acknowledge that you did something wrong. That's kind of the next level of this, but I wonder if we'll ever know any of those things. Probably not.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I doubt that we'll ever know those things. And honestly, I'm more caught up in reading a report that has the word erection in it. I'm like, what the dude? I signed up to cover football.
It's
not proctology.
Just note that it's common. I noticed that in the report also that, hey, this actually, Sue L. Ram said it right. This is a common thing that happens during massages. She did note that in there. That's not abnormal, that part of it.
I mean, that kind of tripped me up. I got to be honest with you.
Hey, she did give him credit, if you want to call it that, for settling these cases. She called it restitution. That helped him based on the way she worded this 16-page document this morning.
And it helped him. They sat out last year, which we agree here is nonsense.
Stupid. He sat out last year because
mitigating circumstances is what she called it. Yeah, absolutely.
Armando, thank you as always. A big news day. We wanted to have you on to get perspective there and your take. Great work at the site as well, which has been hopping with updates all day.
Armando, I am not remorseful that we had you on today. I can say that. No verbal gymnastics needed. Not remorseful at all.
Chad is no gymnast.
But are you remorseful of the situation? That's the question.
No, neither. I would not use the word. I would not use the term remorse to describe anything that just happened in this segment. So we're very happy to have you on.
All right, guys.
Take care.
Good to see you. Armando Salguero there. Check out his great work at OutKick.com. Coming up, we turn the page to college football. Brett McMurphy, one of the best at breaking the news in the Power 5 and beyond. He's with us next to discuss the Big Ten, the SEC, realignment, where we're headed, all of it, plus some college football discussion on the field. Next on OutKick 360. He's one of the best college football reporters across the country, and he's with us on OutKick 360. Brett McMurphy of the Action Network. He's their college football insider, and he joins us now by phone. Brett, great to have you on the show, man. Hope you're doing well.
Thanks. Good afternoon, guys.
Thank you. How would you describe the state of college football? Is the industry insider you spoke with, I know, compared it to Game of Thrones. Do you think that points in the right direction if we were trying to give a definition of someone who had never seen the sport of what was going on?
Maybe Game of Thrones without the dragons.
Okay.
That's probably a better analogy.
And nudity that we're aware of also. No dragons, no nudity, but everything else.
We may have that.
Yeah.
I would, a lot of people would compare it to the Wild Wild West, but I don't want to insult the Wild Wild West. But it's pretty much anything goes at this point. On the field, off the field. There's nobody policing the sport. There's nobody that oversees what's best for the sport. And I understand why. I'm not going to sit here and put blame on any specific conference. I mean, if I'm the SEC, they're going to do what's best for the SEC. Same with the Big Ten, same with the Pac-12, the Big 12, et cetera. And so because of that, you've seen, this realignment stuff come up again. Obviously, the latest USC and UCLA to the Big Ten. Geography does not. If we ever thought it mattered, we know 100% now that it does not matter at all. And because of that, I think we're going to see these super conferences, mega conferences. Greg Sankey at SEC Media Days a couple of weeks ago said, we are a super league. We have been a super league, and I agree with that. And I think we're going to end up. We've got 5 Power 5 conferences now. Before that, there were 6 automatic qualifying conferences that qualified for the BCS. May the BCS rest in peace. And I think in the very near future, we're going to be down to 4 power conferences. And do we ultimately get the 2 power conferences? A lot of people think that that's the end game. We'll have to see. I'm not as pessimistic because I know what that would mean for the rest of college football. But I certainly think 5 power conferences is not going to be surviving for the next few years. And I think we'll be down to 4 and then see what happens after that.
Well, it sounds crazy. I'm honestly becoming a little bit bored with the SEC and Big Ten talk because they're so well set up to do whatever they want now moving forward. But this Big 12 versus Pac-12, the brewing feud, does interest me, Brett. And I'm curious, when you look at Brett Yormark in the Big 12, George Kliavkoff and the Pac-12 exchanging, verbal blows to one another, who actually has the stronger hand right now? When they go to networks, when they go to try to land the next TV contract, when you look at existing and future teams with both conferences, who's got the better situation?
What you said is key. When you're talking about the future, I think who has the advantage in the future is the Big 12. If you just look at each conference now separately and compare to each conference, look, you could get metrics to say the Pac-12 is better. It's got better media markets. You could look at the Big 12 and say, okay, look at success on the field last year. You had, including, the teams that are joining the Big 12 next year, UCF, Houston, Cincinnati, and BYU. You had 5 or 6 Big 12 teams in the top 25 final AP poll. You had 1 from the Pac-12. If you look at the future, though, which I think is what you're alluding to, the Pac-12 is only going to remain a conference if the Big Ten does not expand anymore. Because once the Big Ten adds any more teams from the Pac-12, there's no reason for the remaining schools to stay in the Pac-12. They then would be very interested in the Big 12 if they aren't already. Because at that point, the value of the Big 12 media rights deal would obviously be better of whatever is left of the Pac-12. And also the Pac-12 media rights is up, next year. Their 30-day exclusive window with ESPN and Fox ends this week. So then at that point, they're going to find out what the value of their media rights is worth without USC and UCLA. So if you're Oregon, if you're Washington, if you're even Stanford, and Kliavkoff comes to you and says, okay, here's our new deal. It's worth 30 million, 40 million, whatever the number is they come up with. Are you going to sign that and lock your media rights up for 5, 6 years or more when you know the Big Ten could pick up the phone at any second and you would be making 100 million? That's what's going to be fascinating to see what happens. And, look, everyone I've talked to says the Big Ten is not done. Now, does that mean they're going to add somebody tomorrow or next week? Absolutely not. Will they add somebody within the next couple of years? I would be very confident of that. And George Kliavkoff made a great point about, he's heard that there's some complaints from UCLA about, the travel for the student athletes and kind of the hardships of being, in the Big Ten conference now. He's explaining exactly why the Big Ten is going to go at more teams out west. So USC and UCLA is not put on an island, and they kind of have their Big Ten West kind of, if you will, part of the conference. Does that mean they add 2 more? Does that mean they add 4 more? I don't know. I was told that the Big Ten does not have a specific number they're going for. Obviously, Notre Dame's the golden goose that everybody wants. The Big Ten would love to have them. But if to answer your initial question, I would, if I had to wager on who is going to be the stronger conference, 3-4 years from now, I'm going to say the Big 12, because I don't think the Big Ten's done. And the Big Ten doesn't have any interest in anybody from the Big 12. So that's kind of good news for them. The ACC is kind of off to the side. We haven't even talked about them. They're stuck in their grant of rights deal for the next 14 years. So even if those schools, wanted to leave, which I'm sure they could, I'm sure they would if they could, because again, their revenue is going to be less than half, maybe a third of what the SEC and Big Ten will be. They're kind of stuck together. It's like, I don't know if you guys are old enough, the old Meatloaf song, Paradise by the Dashboard Light. I swear I'll love you till the end of time. And then the deal's done. And they're like, I'm praying for the end of time. That kind of sums up the ACC grant of rights right there.
That's great.
Brett McMurphy, our guest. He's the college football insider for the Action Network.
So I don't know what conference you are. You can be whatever you want. Set Notre Dame aside. What's the most valuable program to you if you're shopping? Who do you want based on brand, television market, all the ingredients that go in there? Taking Notre Dame out of it. Who's the next best commodity you can go get?
For which league?
You pick. You're a league.
Well,
who wants somebody?
I would go both. One for SEC, one for Big Ten.
If you're the SEC, they, and Greg Sankey brought this out. They are contiguous states. Easy for me to say. So I don't think the SEC has any interest in Oregon or Washington or anything like that. I think if the schools were available in the SEC would go for a North Carolina. It would go, because they're not currently in that state, they would go for a Virginia or Virginia Tech. I think they would look at a Clemson, a Florida State, and Miami. Obviously, those last 3 are in states where the SEC currently is. Until they took Texas, the SEC did a great job about never adding schools in states where they have current members. Well, that would change. So if the ACC was not locked into those grant of rights, I think the SEC would take one of those schools. I think the Big Ten would prefer to give USC and UCLA some travel partners. So I think they would look out west, whether it's in Oregon or Washington or Stanford. I think at one time, the Big Ten would also have an interest in North Carolina. Again, they're not in that state. I believe that's the biggest state that's not currently in the Big Ten or SEC. But now that you've got USC and UCLA, you've got to give them some help out there, and so that's why they would look west. If I'm the Big 12, you can't get anybody from the ACC to leave. You're below the SEC and Big Ten, so there's nobody there. So you would look to the Pac-12. You would look at an Arizona State, a Colorado, or a Utah. If you're the Pac-12, you would try to take from the Big 12, or maybe try to do a partnership with the ACC. But the challenge is, if you go in and get schools from the ACC to kind of merge with the Pac-12, does that open up the grant of rights for the ACC? If that does, then that makes those ACC teams susceptible to get swooped up by the SEC or the Big Ten. So the ACC is kind of stuck there off to the side. So I don't know if I answered your question, but it's different based on each conference. It's not like you can say, Kansas is the best option for everybody, or Oklahoma State or Arizona or whatever. It's based on each different conference. But you're right. And that's the thing that makes it challenging. After Notre Dame, there's not an automatic team out there that's like, wow, this is going to add more value to our conference. It's kind of just dependent on the conference and what their priorities are, whether it's geography or pairing them up with other teams within the conference, those sort of things.
So when Tennessee decided to turn state's witness on themselves with the NCAA to fire Jeremy Pruitt and his staff with cause, I was skeptical that it was going to work out when they went down that road. They end up finding, I think, 7 or 8 of the 18 major violations with their own legal team outside of the NCAA's investigation. But given the notice of allegation,
are you still there?
Yeah, can you hear? Can you hear us, Brett?
Brett McMurphy, our guest. Brett,
we may have lost him.
Yeah, we may need to reconnect if possible. We'll find out in just a moment if he's back with us. Paul, it's a good point you bring up, and we'll get back to Tennessee in a moment on the teams. There's not one program outside that's like Notre Dame that every league would want, which is in a way a great thing. If you think of it, if you're a fan of the old system, yeah, if you're a fan of the old system, it's not like a free for all, where you have a draft and everyone's coming over.
I think it's easy if I'm just going to go one team for each conference. I don't think it's easy to pick between Oregon and Washington, which I think those would be the top 2 for the Big Ten. I don't think it's so much more
attractive to me.
If you're the SEC, I don't think it's easy to pick between Clemson and North Carolina and Florida State and Miami.
Yeah.
Those are, you could make an argument either way. Clemson right now, football-wise, of course, you want them. But Clemson basketball is not bringing much to the table. The North Carolina brand overall, I think, is much stronger. It gives you another state. You're already in South Carolina with South Carolina right now. Brett McMurphy's on. Brett, I was asking about Tennessee and how they went about firing Jeremy Pruitt with cause and working with the NCAA, turning everything over. I was skeptical at the time, but at least with the notice of allegation, it seems to have worked based on the wording and how glowing the NCAA was about Tennessee's involvement in the investigation. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, look, the NCAA is on its last legs, but it has been consistent for a long, long time. If you work with the NCAA 99 out of 100 times, they will work with you. They will help reduce the penalties. So, yeah, I think it paid off. And it was not a memorable time under Jeremy Pruitt. 19 losses, 18 level 1 violations, and only 16 wins. So I really like what Josh Heupel's doing there. The offense is tremendous. They can play a little bit of defense. I think they can be a surprise in the SEC. As far as Vegas is concerned, Tennessee, the 4th highest projected win-loss total, only behind, obviously, Alabama, Georgia, and Texas A&M. So, it's best to kind of throw yourself at the court, if you will, and hope they take mercy on you and move on. And it looks like that's what the NCAA has decided to do.
From the Action Network, Brett McMurphy with us. Brett, have you heard any definitive names that are being discussed to replace Mark Emmert with the NCAA?
I've heard a bunch of names. I don't know if anybody really wants it at this point because you don't know. Not actually one time in my life, I'm not being sarcastic. I just don't, you don't know what is the future of the NCAA. Is there a future of the NCAA? I know a lot of presidents' names, current presidents at college universities were mentioned, but, do you really want to leave a university for that, which is so much unknown, where basically the power conferences now are kind of running themselves anyway. So, yeah, I don't know what they end up doing. That's something we'll have to see that plays out. And as these conferences continue to kind of create their own path moving forward, will we even need an NCAA? I talked to Kevin Warren at Big Ten Media Days. I asked him. He told me, that he thinks all the conference realignment stuff will play out in the next 3 to 5 years. And I asked him, okay, and let's go forward 5 years. How many power conferences are there? 2, 3, 4, 5? He said, Brett, I don't know. He said that the market will dictate that. And that basically means TV will dictate that. How much are these conferences worth? How much are these brands worth? How much are the colleges are worth? So we could get to a point where we don't have the NCAA anymore. A Big Ten coach told me that he thinks down the road, we'll see up to 20 teams in the Big Ten. We'll see up to 20 teams in the SEC. One's on Fox, one's on ESPN. The playoff will be college football's version of the Super Bowl. And then you got 6-win teams that will go play in a Tampa Bowl and 7-win teams that'll go play in Orlando Bowl. And he said that's going to end up being college football. So in that scenario, do you really need an NCAA? And if we're only down to 2 or 3 power conferences, why would you want an NCAA? You create your own rules regarding eligibility, NIL, et cetera, and you kind of manage it yourself.
So I'm with you. You were talking earlier about, governance of college football and what's needed with the direction and with leadership. Do you think that the Big Ten, SEC, because those are the 2 conferences right now that matter, and the powers in college sports could come up with a consensus on who should be that czar of college football or who should be that governing body? Is there an obvious candidate out there that would be agreeable for all sides? Or is the reason we don't have that right now, Brett, because those sides are never going to agree on anything?
Well, of course, I would be the perfect commissioner. But
yeah, yes.
You know what? It's not actually that they probably couldn't agree on somebody. It would be like, let's say you 3 guys are commissioners of your A, B, and C conferences. And now I'm going to come in and I'm going to be commissioner, and now I'm going to be your boss. You aren't going to go for that. Why are you going to hire somebody to be your boss when you guys are at the head of your conferences? And so that's kind of how it is with Sankey and Kevin Warren and the other commissioners. They're in charge of their own little silos, their own little villages. So now why are you going to hire somebody that now has power over you? That's simply why we'll never have a commissioner unless we just totally blow up the college model and have something NFL-like. Then maybe you can find somebody. But again, then you're asking these conference commissioners to allow someone to be over them. And I think that's ultimately why we'll never have a commissioner or a college football czar, if you will.
Brett McMurphy with us. Pac-12 Media Days, Brett. The coaches on the field, everyone's expecting Whittingham's team at Utah to be excellent. Beyond Utah, we could put Oregon there too. Where would UCLA stack up? And in your opinion, what's Chip Kelly's expectations there now?
I would actually put Oregon State 4th. I think the media poll had UCLA 4th. I'd put Oregon State 4th. I'd put UCLA probably 5th. It's been fascinating there with Chip. His contract going back to last January, I think it was January 19th, not sure on the exact date, but his buyout went from $9 million to 0. And there was some thinking that maybe he was going to get fired on January 19th. Well, he got a new deal on January 16th. You go back a month before that, UCLA, 5 hours before kickoff, said they couldn't play NC State in the bowl game. There are people, especially in Raleigh, North Carolina, that believe that UCLA didn't play the game. They were decimated by some injuries. But look, I know you guys follow the SEC. LSU was down to 39 players and played their bowl game against Kansas State. They got routed. They had no shot. But you know what? The SEC told LSU, you are not canceling this game. I don't care if you only have 11 players. UCLA, though, they had 40 to 50. They decided, well, they couldn't play because of COVID, injuries, transfers, whatever. Some people, especially in Raleigh, think that UCLA didn't play that game because if UCLA gets routed in that bowl game, then Chip Kelly's out the door. If you don't play that game, he's got a chance to stick around. They didn't play the game. He gets a new contract. I mean, there's going to be pressure on him. I think there are some people that are picking UCLA to be the dark horse of the Pac-12 this year. There's people, and I don't know if I necessarily agree with them, but their narrative is Chip Kelly was a great, great coach, when he was at Oregon because he did things that defenses weren't ready for. Now everybody's seen the spread, everybody's seen up tempo, and they figured ways to slow it down, and he hasn't been successful. Is that a fair analogy or narrative? I'm not sure, but he hasn't been successful at USC. They expected a lot more success. DTR is back at quarterback. They should be much improved, but I think anything short of a bowl appearance would be a huge, huge disappointment for UCLA. I think the win total is around 8.5. Some people think that's too low, but we'll have to see. He hadn't done it yet. Maybe this is the year they finally break through and then move on to the Big Ten and see how that works out.
Brett McMurphy has been our guest. You can follow him on Twitter at Brett_McMurphy. And, of course, he's a great college football insider for the Action Network, and highly recommend following on social if you're not already, but you likely are. Brett, thank you so much.
Appreciate you.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
All right, there's Brett McMurphy. College football certainly kicking off soon. We've got week 0, Vandy and Hawaii. I'm always conflicted. I've got this countdown clock, and I've got one that counts down to the kickoff of the SEC season. Would you guys start it with Vanderbilt, Hawaii, or would you start it in week 1, the countdown?
I'd start it earlier than that. I'd start it that morning with Northwestern and Nebraska in Dublin, Ireland.
No, the SEC, I'm saying.
For the SEC?
You got to start it with Van. I mean, it's a SEC team playing a game.
All right. Week 0. Week 0 it is.
And nobody hates the week 0 concept more than I do.
I'd start it with Mississippi State and La Tech that Thursday night following. I'm going to be watching all those games on week 0. So, I'm the wrong one to ask because I'm going to stay up late night and probably watch the entirety of a 9:30 Central Time kickoff between Vandy and Hawaii.
I'm watching that game just for the storyline aspect.
I'm going to watch.
One way or the other, it's a fascinating development, win or lose for Vandy in that game, and what Clark Lee's trying to build. Coming up, we'll hit the headlines on the Major League Baseball trade deadline, which is coming up tomorrow. We'll tell you what's happened today, and the extension for Deebo Samuel. All the wide receivers getting their money. That's next on OutKick 360. Astros have acquired Trey Mancini from the Baltimore Orioles. That's a part of today's news in Major League Baseball.
Bummer for Hutton's Orioles.
Josh Hader to the Padres.
Yeah.
Brewers.
That's a big one.
Padres aren't afraid to go for it. Manny Machado. They've acquired some dudes in recent years.
And, there's – so who are we still waiting on that could be dealt? Big name-wise. We know Ohtani's staying, right?
Soto, right?
Soto is the big one.
That's the big one, but there's really no word one way or the other. I mean, it's going to take the mother load to get him. So that's the issue, is who's got it.
There are 3 teams for Soto, and it's the Cardinals, Padres, and Dodgers.
I wonder if the Padres gave
can you
up
imagine
any
the Dodgers?
of what. I wonder if the Padres gave up any of that in the deal with the Brewers.
Yeah, maybe.
So it might have taken them out of it. Yankees, I got to give them credit. I mean, they get Benintendi, Scott Efros, I think it is, from the Cubs, a reliever, Frankie Montes, a starter from the A's, and Lou Trevino. So they got 2 relievers, a starter, and an outfielder, which is what they needed. And they did not give up one of their top 3 minor leaguers who they were trying to preserve. I like where they are now. They got what they needed. Do or die. I mean, they did exactly what they need. If they can't do it now, they're not good enough.
Braves making any moves, Chad?
They got back Adrianza, who was a platoon role player a year ago, who's batting a cool 179 with the Nationals this year.
Nice.
So he's until Albies gets healthy, he's just another guy they can plug in at second. They tried Robinson Cano, that didn't work out. He's going down or away or whatever.
They cut him.
Yeah. So Adrianza's the one guy. I'd love to see them make a big splash with someone, but the rumors were Benintendi gone to the Yankees, Ohtani not being moved.
Yep.
Not heard a single reference to Soto, even though that would be amazing for the Braves. So I'm sure they're going to do something. They made some no big splash moves a year ago, but they all worked out. Jock Peterson, Eddie Rosario, Soler. Those were all trade deadline guys that really crushed it for them in the World
Soler
Series
was
run.
amazing.
So they're going to do something. But at this point, I don't see any big splash moves being made.
Deebo Samuel wanted to be traded at one point, and now he's in San Francisco on a new 3-year extended contract, nearly $60 million in guaranteed money for the star wideout who cashed in, doing more than just catching the football. And he's going to be paid now to run the football as well as catch it.
He's got $650,000 in incentives. He can hit it 3 times in the 4 years, and it's based on rushing. It's strictly a rushing incentive. It's like 280 or 380 yards rushing or 3 touchdowns or something like that. It's pretty quirky. Very interesting.
11 receivers signing new deals this offseason worth at least $20 million per season on average.
So that's 11 of the top 16 annual average salary receivers. It's a good time to be a good wide receiver. And A.J. Brown, throwing it back at the Titans. He can't let it go.
We'll get to talk about this more tomorrow.
He said, look, we all got roughly the same deal. I'm the only one that got traded, and you're saying it's on me.
He is the Freddie Freeman of football. He can't let the X go. He still loves the Titans so much.
Deebo Samuel led the NFL in yards per reception last year at over 18. Catch us tomorrow, full of news and interviews on OutKick 360.
Don't block the box. Do lock your locks.